Craigy CL Castle. Craigy CL Castle, also known as Dundas Castle, is tucked away like a crumbling fairy tale amid the Catskill Mountains engulfing woodlands in Roscoe, New York. Even now, the castle is shrouded in mystery and intrigue. No one appears to be confident in its history, with conflicting dates given to its construction. However, it's quite probable that the structure was initially a vacation lodge created by Bradford Lee Gilbert in the early 1880s. The name Craigy CL is supposed to have originated from Gilbert's wife, a Scottish native who was reminded of a little village in Scotland called Craigy CL. After Gilbert died in 1911, the land and lodge was sold to Maurice Sternbach before being purchased by Ralph Wirtz Dundas in 1915. Dundas began building the castle soon after, but he died in 1921 when it was still in the last phases of development. A year after Dundas died, his wife, Josephine Wirtz Dundas, was sent to a sanitarium despite never having resided in the castle. Muriel Harmer Wirtz Dundas, Josephine's sole child, received the money that had passed to her mother from her father. The castle keepers, who were serving as her guardians at the time, quickly took a considerable chunk of her riches. She eventually married and relocated to England, where she joined her husband on an expedition to discover St. John's gold. When the couple terminated the historians and scientists who were assisting in the quest, they replaced them with a mystic who had a willow wand. Muriel's mental stability was eventually called into question, and she was also committed exactly like her mother. The intriguing keep was transferred from the Dundas family for numerous short-term purposes. It was utilized as a summer camp for children for a period, before it was bought as a retreat by the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the Masons, an African-American Masonic congregation from Manhattan. They eventually abandoned that purpose, and though the Prince Hall Masons still possess the building, it currently remains abandoned, decaying and brooding in the woods. The strange history of the place, including the failed attempts to use the property and its final desertion, have given rise to various stories surrounding the home. Some think it's haunted by the ghost of Josephine Dundas, who was allegedly imprisoned in an upper chamber. Others claim that on full moons, the 3 heart-shaped ponds on the site fill with blood. There is no proof that anyone was ever trapped in any of the chambers, and no one ever resided there for any lengthy period of time. However, no one can dispute that the location has an ambiance that may capture the minds of anybody who views the castle that stands alone in the mountains. 8. Henry River Mill Village. The Henry River Mill Village in Hildebrand, North Carolina, first opened to the public in 1905. Like many gold panning villages, it promised jobs and wealth to prospective residents, and it didn't disappoint. Soon after, the village had grown to include more than 20 structures, sustaining a population that worked almost entirely at the mill. They began producing miles upon miles of quality yarn for almost 50 years. However, like most boomtowns, this one was doomed to fail. As time went on, the town eventually became less practical and there was a surplus of unused yarn. By 1973, the Henry River Mill closed its doors. It didn't come as a surprise though, because the town was already dying. People started to move away to seek out better opportunities for work in order to take care of their families. Some of the townspeople stayed to support the mill, but as more and more people left, the nail went into the mill's coffin. In 1987, the village was officially abandoned. Today, it sits as a shockingly modern town from the industrial age, nestled into a private wooded area. Interestingly enough, the whole place is under the ownership of one man, 83-year-old Wade Shepard. He lives locally and owns all 20 buildings. He bought them because he could, but also due to the growing safety concerns. The community was turning into an unpleasant place, attracting vandals and louts up to no good. In 2012, fame and wealth brought a brief breath of life back to Henry River Mill Village. Hollywood felt the rundown village would be the ideal backdrop for the post-apocalyptic nightmare District 12 depicted in the film The Hunger Games. The village was featured in multiple scenes and was quickly visited by visitors and thrill-seekers who ran tours, treks, and sightseeing expeditions in an attempt to capitalize on the story's massive popularity. Mr. Shepard saw this as an opportunity to cut his losses and pass the town on to new hands for the future. He's listed the entire town for sale for a hefty fee of $1.4 million for anyone willing to pay the price. 7. The Windborn Mansion. The Windborn Mansion in Boyds, Maryland was built by Enoch and Mary Totten in 1884. Mary Totten was the daughter of Timothy Howe, the senator of Wisconsin, and was very wealthy. Her father had a cousin, Elias Howe, and he was well known for perfecting the sewing machine. He created the bobbin winder, and that is how the house got its name. At first, the house was pink and had complimentary rose-colored trim. The house had the best gardens, with exotic plants that the Toddens had imported from all over the world, and there was garden staff to maintain it year-round. Many residents believe the mansion is haunted, due in part to the enormous tragedy that occurred there. All 3 Todden children got typhoid fever, most likely from contaminated drinking water. One of the kids died as a result of this. Another girl, Edith Todden, who went on to become a doctor, adopted a daughter who died after falling off a long banister in the house. Edward and Beulah Pickrell acquired the house in 1929. Their son, Edward Pickrell Jr., purchased the house and resided there until his death in 2004. His brother, Paxton Pickrell, has been attempting to sell the long-dying land for years with little success. The home is now presently vacant, with no intention of restoring it, although the property still remains a photographer's paradise. The land is 9 acres in size and features several old muscle cars in the backyard, as well as sprawling trees and flowers. It is also right next to Black Hills Regional Park and has a beautiful view of the river. The inside of the house is strewn with old furniture, letters, magazines, and garments. Although the house is abandoned, there are multiple no trespassing signs around the property, so it may be best to observe from afar. 6. Old Letchworth Village Cemetery. Letchworth Village in Stony Point, New York, was regarded as a promising new trend for the care of the mentally ill when it debuted in 1911. Patients lived in their own village, equipped with farms, stores, and sometimes churches instead of being restricted to a single building. Although the notion was appealing, overpopulation and a lack of funds resulted in horrifying allegations of mistreatment. Letchworth Village was ultimately closed in 1996 after decades of mounting criticism, including charges that the hospital exploited patients as lab rats for testing new experimental treatments. It now remains abandoned, with its deteriorating buildings slowly collapsing into ruin. Letchworth Village's land stretched well over 2,000 acres, yet they set up their cemetery nearly a mile away from its campus, far away from the public eye in the woods. The patients were buried, and their sites were marked with numbers, not names. It made people wonder if Letchworth had something to hide. A grassroots movement resulted in the installation of a memorial plaque at the cemetery in 2007. Over 900 patients' names are placed under an inscription that says, "Those who shall not be forgotten," gathered from decades-old records and logs. Although we can never know for certain which burial numbers correlate to which individuals, the terrible and seemingly forgotten existence of those who suffered and died at Letchworth Village has now been honored. Would you explore some of these abandoned places? Let us know in the comments below and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. 5. Dogtown MA. Dogtown, Massachusetts is a true ghost town with a mysterious and interesting past. Suspicious vagabonds, feral dogs, witches, werewolves, old spells, and spooky dolls are all part of the folklore that surround this gloomy location. In 1693, settlers began moving to the area. They favored the location because it protected them from locals and pirates who didn't favor their presence and were wholly annoyed by the uninvited guests. Dogtown housed nearly 100 families between 1750 and 1800. Following the War of 1812, most farmers left Dogtown. Fears of coastline invaders were fading, and new highways connecting Rockport and Gloucester were being built. This is when everything went wrong. As respectable families left, their abandoned homes began to fill with vagrants and unfavorable characters searching for a place to hide. Those without a family to follow, such as widows and some autonomous single women, stayed behind as well. Rumors spread that some of the people that had stayed began to practice witchcraft. Weird thundering sounds began to radiate from the village, and passers-by reported seeing flickering lights and individuals in the nearby forest. Dogtown, initially known as the Common Settlement, received its name from the town's wandering population of stray dogs. Several widows of fallen sailors and soldiers kept dogs for companionship and safety. Whether it was the loss of their owners or some other unfathomable reason, these dogs went wild and began wandering the surrounding plains. Some of the inhabitants had unusually frightening reputations. The Queen of the Witches was Thomasine Tammy Younger. Tammy resided on Fox Hill near Alewife Brook and was said to curse ox teams bringing fish from the local harbor as they passed through Dogtown. Only when the driver paid the witch's toll would they be left alone. Cornelius Black Neil Finson, a freedman, was the last person to live in Dogtown. During the severe winter, he was found half dead in a crawl space. In 1830, Babson was sent to take care of the estate in Gloucester. However, he didn't last long, and he died not long after. During the Great Depression, Roger Babson, the founder of Babson College, hired out-of-work stonemasons to craft inspiring inscriptions on 36 rocks in Dogtown. There are 36 of these strange and even disturbing messages strewn all over the region. A Boston citizen reported seeing a massive beast wandering the cliffs near Dogtown on March 17, 1984 during a full moon. He suspected it was a mountain lion, but local wildlife experts say there are no mountain lions on Cape Ann. A dead deer was discovered on Cranes Beach on March 21st, and it had been ripped to shreds but not devoured. On the same night, along the Dogtown Road, 2 individuals saw a grey, enormous dog-like creature racing into the woods. Over the last few years, ancient dolls and stuffed animals have started to surface in an area of Dogtown. Tied-up baby dolls and melancholy-looking animals are featured in the collection. Though this is most likely the product of naughty teens, it's always possible that a less desirable individual or group has begun to use Dogtown for their own reasons. Dogtown in Massachusetts is now a 3,000-acre park where visitors can observe the village's abandoned basement tunnels and explore the trails and tangled vegetation that surround the tragic town. 4. Pennsylvania Turnpike. The Pennsylvania Turnpike was called the Tunnel Highway when it was opened in 1940 because it traveled through 7 tunnels. However, it was not very well planned. The roadway was reduced to a single lane in each direction passing through each tunnel. Within a decade, the turnpike was chronically crowded, with frequent traffic backups at tunnel openings. The troublesome 13-mile, 21-kilometer stretch of road was abandoned in late 1968 in favor of a freshly constructed bypass. Since then, it's been closed to automobile traffic, and nature has regained the surrounding region. The once bustling road and tunnels ran right into the midst of the woods, resembling a scenario from a post-apocalyptic thriller. In 2001, there were plans in the works to convert the abandoned roadway into a biking route. However, it's now in the hands of a joint authority. Even in its current state, the road is available to the public for anyone willing to take their chances on broken pavement that hasn't been repaired in over 50 years. 3. The Bridge to Nowhere. Located on the county line in Georgia between Lowndes and Brooks counties is the Bridge to Nowhere. It hasn't been used in years, and it no longer leads to a specific spot anymore. The road that had connected to it before is long gone. It has been closed to visitors, but urban legends and rumors still circulate regarding the bridge, and it's said that multiple murders and suicides have occurred there. The bridge is said to have been finished in 1920. The prominent Blue Springs resort nearby attracted a large number of visitors. By the 1950s, the resort's appeal had begun to wane due to multiple drownings that occurred at the natural spring near the bridge. There was also a car crash that damaged 50 to 100 feet, 15.24 to 30.48 meters of the bridge's railing, and it was never repaired. Flooding washed out roads on either side of the bridge in the late 1940s, making it unsafe for travel. By the 1970s, the bridge was no longer needed and was closed to traffic due mainly to safety concerns. Despite the fact that individuals were not officially permitted to cross the bridge, it became a favorite hangout for youths. Graffiti adorned the bridge, some of it devilish in origin. It's also rumored to be a common meeting place for various cults. Many people claim that one time a husband pushed his wife off of the bridge, and to this day her screams can still be heard from below. In 2016, a movie was filmed there called Spook Bridge. The movie is about a local journalist who investigates the mysterious deaths of a few teenagers who fell off the bridge. The bridge has a bleak future due to the majority of locals wanting it down because it is considered dangerous. 2. The Draken. The Swedish aerospace and defense company known as Saab designed and constructed a fighter aircraft called the Draken between 1955 and 1974. It was the first completely supersonic plane to fly in Western Europe. The Draken featured a revolutionary double delta wing configuration which had never been done before. A team of 500 engineers worked on the design, and they created the prototype known as the Saab 210, and the test flight proved successful, leading to the full-size design of the Draken. The outer 60-degree wing gave amazing performance at low speeds, while the inner wing had an 80-degree angle for high-speed performance. The aircraft replaced Sweden's first generation of jet-powered fighter aircraft and it entered service with the Swedish Air Force on March 8, 1960. Early variants were designed solely for air defense operations, despite the fact that the type was largely regarded as a strong dogfighter for the time. However, because of budget cuts and costly maintenance expenses, the SAF decided to retire the Draken. Finland was one of the last countries to use the Draken aside from Austria. Located in the forest near an airport in Finland, an abandoned Draken with its wing cut off can be found. 1. 1976 Ford Anglia. A driver who abandoned his broken-down vehicle in the woods 40 years ago was surprised to locate it again, in the exact same area where he left it. In 1974, Pekka Numelin of Mikolai, Finland, deserted his 1967 Ford Anglia in the woods outside his parents' house. Mr. Numelin then left the city, leaving the car behind. Years later, the man was discussing cars with his son Tommy when the topic of his deserted Anglia came into the conversation. They made the decision to go back to his old house to see if the car was still there, and much to their surprise, it was. It sat there intact the entire time. Tommy said that a broken hose set off a string of events that included his father dumping water into the radiator, which froze overnight. The freezing water caused the engine to break when the man attempted to start the car. The windows and windshield were still in good condition. However, the automobile had sunk 6 inches into the earth, leading the father and son to believe that the undercarriage had decayed. The two planned to move the car eventually, but the keys have been lost for ages, and they'll have to return with lockpicking tools.
Number 10. UFO sightings. A newly released CIA intelligence report gives a new look into a nearly 50-year-old UFO mystery, providing facts acquired from an experimental missile range in modern-day Kazakhstan. The report covers not just unexplained aerial phenomena, UAP, but also rumors of laser weaponry from the Cold War. The UFO incident happened in 1973 and was first shown to the public in a 1978 CIA intelligence information report. The declassified version of the paper, though heavily censored, has a single line documenting contact with a UFO at a place known as Site 7. The UFO sighting took place in the summer, around dusk, and the witnesses saw an unidentifiable bright green circular mass in the sky. They thought the object was floating above cloud level, despite the fact that the sky was clear at the time of this incident. The witness was unable to estimate the diameter of the object. The green circle enlarged after 10 to 15 seconds, and multiple spiral rings developed around it in a short amount of time. The color was gone in minutes. There was no sound connected to the incident, like an explosion. But after a request for a mandatory declassification review by the Black Vault researcher John Greenwald, a site specializing in declassified government records, the CIA revealed a more thorough image of the encounter that was documented in a lengthy intelligence report. Site 7, where the UFO encounter occurred, was home to the Warhead Checking Unit, as well as a garrison of Soviet Air Force soldiers. While the sighting is less well known in American research circles, it is one of several contacts made with unidentified aircraft phenomenon encircling Soviet military sites during the Cold War, comparable to the inexplicable phenomena documented by the US military today. Number 9. Project Iceworm. Project Iceworm was a covert Cold War effort conducted by the United States to design missile launch sites beneath the ice in Greenland. The goal was to excavate 2,500 miles of tunnels to store and possibly launch 600 nuclear missiles. Greenland was a desirable location thanks to its proximity to Russia, but this also increased the danger of the project. It was kept hidden from Denmark, which Greenland is part of. But you can't expect no one to notice if you drill thousands of kilometers through ice. As a cover, the US Army claimed to be constructing Camp Century, a Danish-approved research center. It was built in 1960 near Thule Air Base, claiming it would study construction processes and conduct scientific experiments in Arctic conditions. In reality, the underground research center provided a reason for the US to excavate and place missiles. Camp Century was a diversion, but it wasn't completely meaningless. Scientists were able to investigate thousands of years of climatic history by digging deep into the nearby ice. They were also able to go back in time by inspecting germs trapped in the melting glacier water. People lived and worked there year-round. The underground camp had a church, a theater, and even a hobby store, all located in weaving tunnels similar to an ant colony. The world's first transportable nuclear reactor, which was constructed elsewhere and then moved to the deep snow caverns, provided all of the electricity. Despite the use of typical building materials like wood and steel, the majority of the tunnels were simply ice. They planned to survive 10 years without major maintenance, but the glaciers were advancing quicker than projected, rendering the camp useless. It was vacated, used sparingly for a few years, then finally completely decommissioned in 1967. Constant snowfall and falling glaciers were of great concern to the US military since they thought the ice would hide the research station. In 2016, an analysis was conducted and discovered global warming was causing the ice sheet to melt, and the facility would be unveiled by the end of the century, if not sooner. Number 8. Acoustic Kitty. Acoustic Kitty was a CIA project started in the 1960s by the Central Intelligence Agency to employ cats to spy on the Kremlin and Soviet embassies. A veterinary surgeon inserted a microphone inside cat's ear canal, a tiny radio transmitter at the base of its skull, and a thin wire into its fur during an hour-long surgery. This was supposed to let the cat capture and transfer sound from its surroundings discreetly. Because of distraction issues, the cat's appetite had to be addressed in another procedure. According to Victor Marchetti, a former CIA official, Project Acoustic Kitty cost about $20 million. Acoustic Kitty's first assignment was to listen in on two men in a park near the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. The cat was placed nearby, but was almost immediately hit and killed by a car. But in 2013, Robert Wallace, a former director of the CIA's Office of Technical Service, disputed this, claiming that the project was dismissed due to the complication of training a cat to behave. He said that the equipment was taken out of the cat was resewn for a second time, and lived a long and happy life afterwards. The project was labeled a failure and complete loss. In 1967, the operation was cancelled completely. CIA researchers thought they could train cats to go short distances, but they said the environmental and security issues in utilizing this approach in a true international setting led us to conclude that, for our intelligence purposes, it would not be viable, according to a closing note. When CIA documents were released in 2001, the project was revealed to the public. Number 7. Project Horizon. Project Horizon was a 1959 study done to evaluate the possibility of creating a facility on the Moon, at a period when the United States Departments of the Army, Navy, and Air Force were in charge of space program initiatives. On June 8, 1959, the Army Ballistic Missile Agency, ABMA, published a study for the Army called Project Horizon, a U.S. Army study for the establishment of a lunar military outpost. Project Horizon suggested the lunar outpost be used to establish and protect prospective U.S. interests on the Moon, to create techniques for surveillance of the Earth and space, for research operations on the Moon's surface, to serve as a foundation for Moon exploration, deeper exploration into space, and military operations on the Moon if necessary. They believe the $6 billion permanent outpost would be needed for national security as soon as practicable. With 12 troops, the planned operating date was December 1966, but Horizon was rejected by President Dwight Eisenhower when the major responsibility for America's space program was passed to the civilian organization NASA. Horizon was predicted to need 147 early Saturn A1 rocket flights to transport enough spaceship parts into low Earth orbit for assembly at a spent tank space station. A lunar landing and return spacecraft launched by a Saturn A2 would have transported 16 people to and from the base. The direct ascent lunar mission requirement called for a 12 million pound thrust super booster, which could not possibly be completed in time for the 1966 deployment goal. The project wasn't viable at the time, so it was scrapped. Number 6. Operation Northwoods. Operation Northwoods was a proposed false flag operation against American civilians that began at the United States Department of Defense in 1962. The details instructed CIA agents to plan and carry out terrorist attacks on American military and civilian targets, then blame the Cuban government for the attacks, so a war against Cuba would be justified. The memo outlined the possibility of assassinating Cuban immigrants, sinking boats carrying Cuban refugees, hijacking planes, blowing up a U.S. ship, and staging violent terrorism in U.S. cities. President John F. Kennedy thankfully rejected these suggestions. The military's worry from the Cold War prompted Fidel Castro to take power in Cuba in 1959 and led communists into the new Cuban government, nationalizing American firms and increasing connections with the Soviet Union, provoking the military's worry. The program intended to gain public support for a war against Cuba by blaming the country for terrorist attacks committed by the U.S. government. The Joint Chiefs of Staff prepared the proposal, which was signed by Chairman Lyman Lemnitzer and delivered to the Secretary of Defense. Despite being part of the U.S. government's anti-communist Cuban project, Operation Northwoods was never actually sanctioned. It was authorized by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but later rejected by President Kennedy. Under the confines of Operation Northwoods' ideas, none of the proposed false flag activities have officially launched. Number 5. Project Blue Book. From March 1952 through December 17, 1969, Project Blue Book was the codename for the United States Air Force's comprehensive examination of UFOs. The operation, based at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, was first supervised by Captain Edward J. Rappelt. It followed projects like Project Sign, which began in 1947, and Project Grudge in 1948. Blue Book had two goals: evaluate if UFOs posed a threat to national security, and conduct scientific analysis of UFO-related material. Tons of UFO reports were gathered, investigated, and filed. The project was cancelled in 1969 after the Condon Report, which indicated studying UFOs was unlikely to generate any scientific breakthroughs, and a review of the report by the National Academy of Sciences went public. Project Blue Book collected 12,618 UFO claims by the time it decided that the majority of them were just misidentifications of natural phenomena, clouds, stars, etc., or conventional aircraft. According to the National Spy Office, a number of the reports could be explained by test flights of the formerly secret reconnaissance planes U-2 and A-12. Even after an in-depth investigation, though, 701 complaints were categorized as unexplained. The UFO reports have been stored and are available under the Freedom of Information Act, but all witnesses' names and other personal information have since been removed. Is it possible that out of those 701 unexplained complaints, there could be evidence of an actual UFO? Tell us what you think in the comments, and hit subscribe while you're at it. Number 4. Operation Washtub. The United States Air Force's Office of Special Investigations and the FBI collaborated on Operation Washtub, or STAGE, Stay Behind Agent Program. Its goal was to establish an intelligence network in case the Soviet Union attacked and gain control of Alaska. The operation, which was conceived by J. Edgar Hoover and his then protege Joseph Carroll, DIA, operated for 8 years from 1951 through 1959, when Alaska was awarded statehood. The major goals of Operation Washtub were to cultivate possible stay-behind agents for secret intelligence gathering, as well as to preserve evasion and escape facilities for captured American forces. The FBI sharply stopped its engagement in September 1951 for reasons that have not been revealed in released FBI documents. Communications from that time period indicate that Director Hoover ordered the FBI to get out immediately, fearing public shaming if an invasion happened. This indicated that the Air Force Office of Special Investigations was responsible for almost the entirety of the operation's execution. For this mission, the agents were given 30-06 rifles with 4 scopes, a small caliber handgun with Maxim silencer, a camera, a climbing rope, and several other items provided by the government. The second component of the operation was an escape and evasion strategy for crashed American planes, which included supply caches for all branches of the US military. Throughout the operation, agents were paid a base salary of $3,000 per year, which they were told would increase after the invasion began. At the conclusion of the operation, 89 agents were assumed to be in different locations, specified in the official document. The operation was eventually called off due to the difficulties of keeping the agency's finances and feeding the caches in the harsh Alaskan weather. Number 3. Project MK Ultra. The code name for the semi-legal human testing program developed and carried out by the United States CIA was Project MK Ultra. The studies were designed to establish processes and identify chemicals like LSD that could be used during interrogations to weaken people and force confessions through brainwashing and psychological torture techniques. MK Ultra utilized a variety of methods to manipulate its subjects' psychological states and brain functions, including secretive administration of high doses of psychoactive drugs like LSD and other chemicals, electroshocks, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, among other torture methods, were also used. It started in 1953, was scaled back in 1964 and 1967, and finally ended in 1973. It coordinated with the United States Army Biological Warfare Laboratories and was organized by the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence. The project participated in unlawful acts, like the exploitation of unknowing American and Canadian residents as their test subjects. MK Ultra's reach was vast, with disguised research at over 80 institutions, including colleges, universities, hospitals, jails, and pharmaceutical businesses. Although some high executives at these places were aware of the CIA's involvement, the CIA worked through front associations. The Church Committee of the United States Congress and Gerald Ford's United States President's Commission on CIA Activities in the United States officially brought MK Ultra to public knowledge in 1975. The Church Committee and Rockefeller Commission investigations relied on sworn testimony from direct participants of the project and a small number of documents that managed to escape CIA Director Richard Helms's order to destroy all MK Ultra files in 1973, after which the investigations were hindered. A Freedom of Information Act request in 1977 unveiled a stockpile of 20,000 files connected to MK Ultra, prompting Senate hearings. In July 2001, the remaining MK Ultra information was declassified to the public. Number 2. Operation Mockingbird. Operation Mockingbird was an alleged large-scale initiative launched by the CIA in the 1950s that hired American journalists to take part in a propaganda network. The CIA told the journalists to produce phony pieces that endorsed the spy agency's viewpoints. Student cultural organizations and journals were purposefully sponsored as fronts for this operation. Journalists were allegedly blackmailed and coerced into participating as well. In a 1977 magazine article titled "The CIA and the Media," it is stated by one of the journalists that the CIA secretly bankrolled foreign press agencies, magazines, and newspapers. This offered an incredible cover for CIA employees. After these allegations, a number of legislative investigations were conducted in the 1970s by the Church Committee, a group established by the U.S. Senate. The Church Committee investigations looked into government activities and suspected abuses carried out by the CIA, NSA, FBI, and even the IRS. The CIA declassified and released over 700 pages of records from the 1970s in a compilation named The Family Jewels in 2007. These files were about investigations and controversies involving agency corruption in the 1970s. There was just one reference to Operation Mockingbird in these papers, and it was disclosed that 2 American journalists were wiretapped for a period of months. Number 1. Ghost Army. During World War II, the Ghost Army was a strategically deceptive organization of the United States Army, formerly known as the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. This 1,100-man force was assigned to a unique duty within the Allied Army: to fool the enemy by impersonating other Allied army formations. They were first utilized in combat against the opponent on the evening of June 6, 1944, D-Day, when they landed in Normandy with the First Army. The regiment was on its way home by June 23, 1945, after serving with 4 U.S. armies in England, France, Luxembourg, Belgium, Holland, and Germany. They oversaw nearly 20 combat deceptions, working close to the front lines. Ghost soldiers were urged to utilize intelligence and their ability to deceive, confuse, and mislead the German army. Several were hired from art schools, marketing companies, and other jobs that put emphasis on creativity. In normal life, ghost soldiers worked as painters, architects, performers, stage designers, or engineers. Even though the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops consisted of only 1,100 men, it employed British-developed technology like dummy tanks and artillery, fake planes, and gigantic speakers blaring the sounds of infantry and guns to fool Germans into thinking it was a 2-division, 30,000-man force. The intricate plots they employed assisted in diverting German soldiers away from the sites of bigger Allied battle units. Their narrative remained a closely guarded secret for over 50 years after the war, until it was declassified in 1996. Have you heard of any other declassified government projects?
8. El Escorial. Located in the Spanish town of San Lorenzo de El Escorial outside Madrid, El Escorial is the historic home of King Philip II, who'd built it in the early 1560s. The building was meant to commemorate Spain's victory against France in the 1557 Battle of St. Quentin during the Italian War of 1551–59. King Philip also wanted the property to function as a resting place for his parents, himself, and his descendants. The complex was finally completed in 1584, almost 21 years after construction first started. Almost all the Spanish kings that have ruled in the last 5 centuries are buried at El Escorial, including the Bourbons and the Habsburgs. In addition to the mausoleum, the property also consists of a monastery and a schoolhouse. Legend has it that when Lucifer was banished to hell, he created 7 doors to the underworld located throughout Madrid. One such portal is said to be located in El Escorial, which sits at the foot of Mount Abantos, where Lucifer supposedly lived before being exiled. While the complex was constructed, workers constantly saw a black dog wandering around the site, as if he were guarding the property. Folklore claims the canine was a physical manifestation of Lucifer himself. The demonic dog was eventually captured and killed after acting aggressive toward the builders. Some records claim that when King Philip retired to the monastery, he often heard a dog barking through the night. These centuries-old stories continue to circulate throughout the town even today. 7. St. Albans Sanatorium. The property that eventually came to be known as the St. Albans Sanatorium originally served as a Lutheran boys' school in Redford, Virginia. Rumor has it that the teachers encouraged students to bully each other, turning the learning environment into a living hell that pushed some kids to even take their own lives. The building was later repurposed as a psychiatric infirmary in 1916. It was advertised as more of a therapeutic facility compared to other asylums, offering a rooftop garden, bowling alley, and a small farm. But this was far from the reality that was the St. Albans Sanatorium, where patients were often subjected to brutal experimental treatments without consent. These procedures, which included partial brain removals or lobotomies, insulin-induced comas, and electroconvulsive therapy, often left victims permanently disabled, or sometimes worse, dead. There was also a treatment called hydrotherapy, which involved draping a patient's head and body with cold, wet towels and leaving them to soak, often for days at a time without a break. The facility was understaffed and overpopulated, leaving exhausted staff members unable to tend to the thousands of patients in their care at any given time, and making already bad conditions much worse. Not surprisingly, many distraught individuals took their own lives under such massive pressure. By the time the institution shut its doors in the 1990s, it had been declining in quality for decades. The closure was long overdue, but some paranormal experts and enthusiasts are convinced not everybody's left the building. Many visitors report seeing apparitions, shadowy figures, and levitating objects. Some say they've heard voices and other eerie, unexplained noises. Even in the absence of these supernatural occurrences, the building carries a dark, depressing aura that many claim is enough to give a person chills. 6. Leamington Spar Station. Since the mid-1800s, the town of Royal Leamington Spa in Warwickshire, England, has been a major train stop between London and Birmingham. For decades, staff and commuters have reported paranormal sightings and activity, giving the site a reputation as one of Britain's most haunted buildings. Adding to the station's mystique is an abandoned basement on one of the platforms, which contains a partially sealed-off staircase that leads seemingly to nowhere. An upstairs office is also rumored to be a hotbed of supernatural activity. In 2014, an employee claimed to have witnessed an invisible force slamming doors, throwing paperwork around, and turning lights on and off. This disturbing activity got so bad that Chiltern Railways had to hire a supernatural liaison officer to keep an eye out for ghosts throughout the station. A journalist named Chloe Mason spoke with the officer Nick Rees on behalf of the Warwick Tab in 2016. Rees told her that he'd gotten used to hearing mysterious footsteps at the property, but the ghosts were mostly friendly and had good energy. His duties included maintaining order among the spirits, making sure that they didn't eat people's food, and checking their tickets. Having an employee on duty to keep the ghost in line seemed to put a lot of customers at ease. Speaking with the Daily Mail, Rees attributed this more to his ability to make people laugh and smile than his ghost hunting skills, but he said he'd also developed a bond with the invisible departed commuters of the past. Another staff member told Mason they'd seen doors slam shut out of nowhere, and a night patrolman described the station as one of the most haunted places out of many he'd visited in his lifetime. 5. Dragshome Castle. Nestled among picturesque lakes and meadows on the Danish island of Zealand, Dragshome Castle was built as a shining palace in 1215 by the Bishop of Roskilde. Also popularly known as Dragshome Slot, it's one of Denmark's oldest secular buildings. During the Middle Ages, the structure was converted into a fortified castle. It was seized by the crown during the 16th century as part of the Protestant Revolution called the Reformation. From 1536 to 1664, it functioned as a prison for church clergy members and nobility. The castle went through several owners after that, and was even restored at one point after its defenders tried to blow it up to stop it from falling into Swedish hands during an invasion. There are rumored to be more than 100 ghosts lurking throughout the historic property. One of them, James Hepburn, was a prominent Scottish nobleman and the third husband to the infamous Mary, Queen of Scots. He was imprisoned at Dragshome Slot in 1573 and received just enough food and water to keep him alive, according to legend. Hepburn supposedly went insane behind prison walls and died in the late 1570s. Ever since, visitors have reported seeing him riding through the courtyard on his horse. Another ghost, known as the White Lady, was locked away in one of the castle's dungeons by her own father after sleeping with a commoner and getting pregnant. Witnesses have claimed to see a woman wandering the castle at night in a white dress, searching for her long-lost lover and moaning pitifully in sorrow. One of the most famous spirits at Dragshome Castle is a noble Danishman named Anglia Brockenhus. Better known as the Mad Squire, it's uncertain whether he went crazy before or after being locked up at the site. While most of the ghosts have sad stories linked to their presence at the castle, there's at least one happy ghost who roams the palace's halls. Known as the Grey Lady, she died shortly after being treated for a toothache. She was incredibly grateful to the castle's master, who cured her pain, and can now sometimes be seen looking for other acts of kindness to perform. Have you ever been to a castle? Tell us about it in the comments below, and hit subscribe while you're at it. 4. Recoleta Cemetery. Located in Buenos Aires, Argentina, the Cementerio de la Recoleta, or Recoleta Cemetery, became the city's first official public graveyard in 1822. It contains at least 6,400 graves and is one of the world's strangest cemeteries, filled with unique burial markers of all kinds of architectural styles, including miniature Greek temples and Baroque cathedrals. Some of the country's wealthiest and most iconic figures and families are buried here, including the beloved former First Lady Eva Evita Perón, who passed away back in 1952. Presidents, scientists, and other famous individuals were also laid to rest at Recoleta Cemetery, including one of Napoleon Bonaparte's grandchildren, Isabel Waleski Colonna. At first glance, the property seems to be more whimsical than eerie. In fact, this city of the dead is known for its outstanding beauty. But those who take the time to research it or talk to locals will learn the disturbing story of Rufina Cambaceres, a 19-year-old socialite who was mistakenly declared dead by officials after a medical emergency and buried alive. Several days after Rufina was laid to rest, a cemetery worker found her casket and saw that it had been moved in the mausoleum. At first, he blamed grave robbers, but after taking a closer look, he noticed parts of the casket were broken and scratched from the inside, and the young woman's remains were covered in cuts and other injuries she received while trying to free herself. The door to Rufina's mausoleum now contains a statue of her that her mother had made after learning of her daughter's unfortunate fate. With such a horrific tragedy happening at Recoleta, it's hard to think that it's not haunted by the poor young woman's ghost. 3. Getter's Island. Located in the Delaware River just outside eastern Pennsylvania, a 5.7-acre landmass known as Getter's Island was listed in 2018 for a modest $150,000. It's both private and accessible. When the river runs low, a person is easily able to walk to the mainland. A small canoe or boat is usually enough to get across during all other times, begging the question why such an ideal piece of real estate came with such a cheap asking price. Getter's Island is a hard sell because of its reputation as one of Pennsylvania's most haunted properties, according to realtor Teresa Barlow, who was tasked with finding a buyer for the site. The property is named after Charles Getter, who murdered his wife centuries ago in 1833. He was hanged on the island because it could hold a bigger audience than downtown Easton. The first attempt at executing Getter failed. The second time was successful, but was a long and gruesome process. It was the last public execution to be carried out on Pennsylvania soil due to its disturbing nature. Then Governor George Wolfe banned these gory spectacles the next year. Legend has it Getter's ghost haunts the island. A couple owned the property for nearly 60 years before putting it up for sale, indicating that the alleged hauntings didn't bother them at all. They used the island as a recreational site. There are other downfalls to Getter's Island though. In addition to paranormal activity that happens there, the land is prone to flooding, and Barlow admitted she's unsure if any structures can be built on it. In the past, it was home to an amusement park and lumberyard, but there are reasons those businesses no longer exist, and it may be for these reasons instead of the ghosts. 2. St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. Established in 1789, St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 is the oldest burial ground in New Orleans. It takes up an entire city block and is home to more than 700 tombs holding the remains of nearly 100,000 people. Most of the burials are in the vaults located above ground due to the city's high water table, which makes graveyards prone to flooding. While many historic and noteworthy figures are buried here, Cemetery No. 1's most famous grave belongs to a Creole woman named Marie Laveau. Born in 1801 as a free woman of color, Laveau was infamously known as the Voodoo Queen of New Orleans. She inherited much of her expertise from her mother and grandmother, who also practiced voodoo. Laveau also did fortune-telling, prepared herbal remedies, and was an expert on all things occult. She incorporated elements of African religion and culture, as well as Catholicism, into her respected techniques. The Voodoo Queen passed away in 1881 at 86 years old. Almost immediately, rumors began to swirl of paranormal encounters with her spirit. Within days of her passing, several people claimed to have seen her ghost walking through the cemetery, mumbling a Santeria voodoo curse. Those who've crossed paths with her have often said that she seems to be in a bad mood. When people try approaching Laveau's ghost, she vanishes. Legend has it that those who scoff at or don't agree with her beliefs are sometimes scratched, pinched, or shoved to the ground by a mysterious invisible force. Others have reported feeling inexplicably ill after visiting the cemetery, leading many to wonder if Laveau continues to practice voodoo from beyond the veil. People have also claimed to see a large black cat with glowing red eyes wandering the site. To avoid being cursed by this so-called voodoo cat, visitors are warned to never turn their back on the feline and are told to instead cross themselves 3 times while carefully backing away. Many people leave candles, flowers, voodoo dolls, beads, and other offerings at Laveau's grave, in hopes of getting on her good side and perhaps even receiving her blessings. 1. Overton Bridge. Between 300 and 600 dogs have leapt from the tops of Overton Bridge in Dumbarton, Scotland since the 1960s, and sadly, over 50 of them have tragically died doing so. Many believe that paranormal activity is to blame for the canine's bizarre behavior. Dog walkers have reported an unexplainable force that seems to overcome their pets out of nowhere, causing the dogs to run full force to the edge of the bridge, jump, plummet to the rocks 50 feet below. Some stories even claim the dogs who survived their first jump often try to do it again sometime later. Dumbarton's residents are known for their superstitious tendencies, so it's easy to question if these tales are just the exaggerated rumors of overly imaginative dog owners. But many of the incidents are verified and have actually happened, sparking big enough concerns to prompt the Scottish Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals to investigate. Officials never found solid answers for what could be causing so many dogs to jump off the bridge. Their most logical theory is that the dogs detect mammal activity below the bridge using their enhanced sense of smell, and it compels them to instinctively follow their nose. But there's surely animal activity below other bridges, leaving one to wonder if this really is the case. One thing for certain though, avoid Overton Bridge while walking your dog. Thanks for watching. Which one of these places is the spookiest to you? Tell us in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.